Welcome back to the study of Joshua. We're so glad you're here with us, those in the studio, and we have a fresh place that God has blessed us with to record, and we're so thankful for that. We're thankful for you online and those of you in Kenya that are attending school and making us a part of your experience there, and we trust that we are encouraging and enabling you in so many ways. Let's possess the land, and this is session number 3. The 2 spies have returned from their reconnaissance with a good report. This is in Joshua chapter 3. They're reporting about the city of Jericho. They're reporting about the land of Canaan in general. Surely Joshua must have experienced some anticipation and true raw excitement with the normal anxiety that accompanies the knowledge that you're on the verge of something great. Sensing that the Israelites were in the middle of a tremendous miracle that was about to happen. God can give you that sensibility and that awareness that something big is cooking and you're witnessing the process of the middle. In Joshua chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, we've labeled it Following God's Plan. Following God's Plan. In verse 1, it tells us a little bit of the setting. Joshua arose early in the morning. I don't doubt it. He knows that something big is going to happen, and there's something stirring within his spirit. This is not just another day at the office for Joshua. He's up early. He is anticipating what God is going to do on this historic day. What do you think he might have been doing so early? Well, there's a possibility he was meditating on the goodness of God. He might have been remembering all that God had done for Israel up to this point, just in his lifetime. Just the whole history of Israel from Egypt now to Canaan. And he's praying that the Spirit of God would enable him to do whatever God calls upon him to do. He's open. He's obedient. He's pliable. He is going to do what God directs him to do. But let me tell you, it'll disturb your sleep pattern. It will excite you. Depending on God for direction and strength will disturb your normal sleeping pattern because there's some anticipation. There is some preoccupation with what God might do. You find times maybe for you it's late at night. Some of you find it early in the morning where you read, you study, you pray, you meditate, and you can find God will speak to you like no other particular time of the day. I don't know that there's a holy time of the day for this. Find out what works for you. Find out, but don't just ignore it and say, well, someday I'll figure it out. You need to figure it out sooner rather than later. In chapter 3, verse 3, when you see God move, you move also. This is a tremendously powerful yet simple lesson to see here. We look to God for direction. That's important. We look to God for timing. You see, we've got to have both of those working together. Direction is important, but it's not the only thing. Timing is important, but it's not the only factor. And then the principle is here taught, when God moves, you must move also. When God moves, you must move also. We've looked to him for direction, as Joshua did. We look to him for timing. You may know the right thing to do, but that's not enough. You've got to know when to do it. And that's so very important. The Ark of the Covenant was the symbol of the presence of Jehovah, both being present and being manifested among his people. The Ark of the Covenant is famous, and in this, if you, and I'm drawing your attention to the focus of Joshua. In chapters 3 and 4 of Joshua, the Ark of the Covenant is mentioned 17 times. Now, this is not just pure numbers, but when you have anything mentioned that often in a short period or span of Scripture, you go back and you pay attention. What is going on here? Joshua's written record shows the focus upon the Ark of the Covenant for a purpose. It shows a couple of things. One, the focus is not on Joshua. That's important. He's not turning the spotlight upon himself. The focus is not on the Levite priests that are, of course, functional and involved with the ark. The focus is not on any of the people who lead the people of God into victory. The focus is not on you, my friend. The focus is upon God Himself, who leads the way in manifestation and in presence. That's what the Ark of the Covenant represents here. We're focusing upon God in our midst. And Joshua's following that principle. He's saying, don't be looking at me. It's God that's leading us. And the ark is something that we're focusing on. And so in verse 5, there's a command that goes forward, and the word of the Lord comes and says, sanctify yourselves. That'll contradict some of your theology. For tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Now, sanctify is a special preparing in this context for the anticipation of God doing something special. He's promised to do something, and He said, get ready. Get yourself ready. In Exodus chapter 19, there's two different occasions that Joshua remembers that God said to Moses, sanctify yourselves and wash your clothes. Twice in Exodus 19, verses 10 and also in verse 14. This is not a day to focus on laundry chores. That's not the point here. But it's a time to prepare one's own heart for God to do something special. Sanctify yourselves. Get yourself prepared and ready. And I've pastored some in the past. I've been involved in church business and church denominations, a handful of them. And one of the things that we've seen, and I'm sure you have seen as well, we can announce several days of special meetings at the church. And they can come and they can go, and someone will say, see, I didn't get anything out of that. And yet, others attending the same services, sitting on the same pew, can say, God truly met us in a special way, and I'm changed for the better because of it. Same service, same sermon, same moving of the Spirit, and you're sitting maybe next to each other. And one person receives life-changing, life-altering manifestation, and the other one has got their arms folded and goes, there wasn't anything here for me. You see, the personal preparation of your heart for God to move is always a good thing to do, even if the anticipated manifestation doesn't materialize. Even if God doesn't move, it's good for you to prepare. You see, you don't want to ever play catch-up. That you're standing at the back at the end of the service and you realize the Spirit of God is moving upon people, and you realize that you're missing out and you're just a spectator. Were you there to witness? Yeah, you saw it, but you weren't part of it. You didn't participate. You weren't in the action of what happened. Two important keys here to mention is preparation. God announces here, I'm going to do something tomorrow. Get ready. Wash your clothes. Clean your house. Tune up the car. Get yourself prepared in mind and heart for the Spirit of God to move. And then the second element is participation. When He begins to move, you move in. You don't just watch. You don't prepare and watch. This is not a spectator sport. This is something that you are to be you're intended to be involved by the Spirit of God. We look for the Spirit of God to move in manifestation, and then it happens. When that happens, we must move into what God has intended or spoken forth. We've got to be involved in it, and we see that pattern with Joshua. In verses 7 through 9, staying in chapter 3, God exalts Joshua in front of the congregation. It's easy for any of us to be nostalgic and romantic and look back to some previous time and wish for certain things to be the way they used to be. I suppose that touches every one of us in some fashion at some time, that I wish it were like it was in the 60s or the 50s or the 40s, or maybe you want it to be back in the first century. Many have had reflection on some of the Israelites to consider the possibility of the great old days. I don't know what that would be for you, but if it was before indoor plumbing and running water, I'm really not that interested. I don't know about you. When they invented carpeting and air conditioning, I become really appreciative. How about you? When they have something to sleep on beside the ground, I'm really interested. I like to have the bathroom inside the house if we can do that. The good old days, you can think of it in a very romanticized fashion. Oh, I wish I were with the Israelites in the desert. Yeah, and after 20 minutes, you want to come back. Yeah. Let me tell you, the heat, the sand. You see, there were no new shoes for 40 years. And I could go on and on. The great old days under Moses for these people. God chooses this particular time to lift up his chosen leader in a public display. This wasn't the prearranged pastor appreciation month that we've seen others do for their own promotion. Joshua doesn't conceive this. He doesn't contrive it. Why would God do this? He wants to give assurance to the people of God and also to Joshua himself that God is just as capable with Joshua, as he was with Moses. God has not suddenly become weaker, less effective, less strong. He is just as strong and capable under this leader, Joshua, as he was in the good old days with Moses. See, God is not just the honorary leader of our club. He is Elohim. He is the mighty God. He is the one who is Lord over all the earth. He is the one that enables his appointed leadership to lead and to function with his power. With his power. Was Moses a great man? Yes, he was. But God didn't suddenly lose all of his punch and strength and effectiveness when Moses dies. Oh, but it's not nearly as good under Joshua as let me tell you, God is still God. God is still strong under current leadership. God did never depend upon the strength of Moses. Never. For it was always Moses depending upon the strength of God. And so it is with us today that each of us finds our strength and our endurance in ministry in God from him. We do more than we are capable of doing. We go beyond our own limitations because it's God that's in charge. It's God and his strength being manifested through us. The phrase that they may know. That they may know. And there are several references about they in this phrase. But here in verse 7 is God's reason for the miracle that's about to happen. That they may know. God doesn't need to impress us with a show of power. He doesn't need to generate some kind of false confidence. He wants us to know that he is involved in this venture. He is involved intricately in the movement of his people under the leadership of Joshua. And he gives Joshua, in verse 8, some absolutely abrupt instructions that are received from God without any promise, without any projection of what's going to happen next. You know, I would like to have a roadmap. I want to know where we're going with this. And God simply gives Joshua, and sometimes us, just the next step. Well, where are we going? Well, I don't know. Well, I need to know that. Well, then sit down and wait and miss out on everything, friend. Because if you have to know the future before you move, you're going to miss out on everything. Because God is wanting us to trust Him in our obedience. The old song, Trust and Obey, is certainly ringing the correct bell as they wrote that song. You don't have to know the next step. You don't have to know the future. You don't have to know where we're headed, but you do have to obey what God says to do next. And He's saying that they may know. You see, He's not real showy in His power, in His strength demonstration. Not yet. And so we have the problem in verses 10 through 17 of crossing over the Jordan. Crossing over the Jordan. Some of you have been to the Jordan River. It's a good-sized river. But here's a problem. How are we going to get across the river? We don't have a bridge. We don't have the Army Corps of Engineers to build a pontoon bridge for us for 3 million people to walk across. There's a whole bunch of questions here that are simply not answered. But God gives us direction, and He expects us to trust Him and do what He says. Trust me and do what I tell you to do. In verse 15, this just seems contradictory to some that are logical based, because God picks the hardest time of the year to cross over the river. If He would just wait 30 days, it'll be easy. We can get across the river. It won't be a problem. But He has picked the springtime, and you can go over there now in the springtime, and you can watch this happen. And it's happened every springtime throughout history, that the Jordan River floods and overflows its banks. In the normal part of the year, it's a pretty tame river. The water just kind of docilely moves through the bed and everything's fine, and you can get out there and you can have somebody baptize you. I've baptized people in the Jordan River, the ones that wanted. I've preached on the riverbanks to hundreds of people about the meaning of baptism, but there was no flood. God somehow slipped a cog here. He had a moment of forgetfulness. He picked the worst time of the year to cross the river. Let me give you some technical numbers, and the more engineering stuff you know, the more this will mean something to you, to give you a sense and a feel of the dimension of the miracle that is about to transpire. At flood stage, the river is 90 to 100 feet wide. Okay? It's between 3 and 12 feet deep. It's also coming down from what's called a falling elevation of between 9 and 40 feet per mile. That when water is coming down and falling 40 feet in altitude per mile, a raging torrent is produced. These are factors that work together. It's wide, it's deep, it's coming down out of the mountains fast. And there's a lot of water moving through. Why would God choose to cross the Jordan River during the springtime flood? Maybe we could tug on his sleeve and pull him over to the side and say, look, I could have helped you on this one. I could give you some advice. This is not the right day to do this. This is the worst day of the whole year. Do you think God didn't know about the conditions that the Israelites are facing? You think he didn't anticipate and know that? You think God doesn't know about the challenges that your family is facing today? Well, he didn't anticipate this. He knew it was coming. In fact, in some cases, he may have caused it. Oh, no, that would never happen. Well, let me tell you the rest of the story and you'll see. God wants to fully demonstrate that his power is sufficient, not over the easy stuff, but in the worst of conditions. Years and years ago, I used to follow Big 8 football in the Midwest, collegiate football. University of Nebraska was very strong, and they had so many conference games, but they had, at the beginning of the season, usually 3 non-conference games that were kind of warm-up for the Big Red. And once in a while, they would book a game with the College of Helpless Orphans, or something like that. They barely had a college team. Now, they paid them a big fee for appearance, but they would go in and they would just beat the socks off of that team and beat them about 66-0. And I was ashamed. You know, if you're big, bad, and have all this power and talent, why are you demonstrating on the Sisters of the Poor football team? Well, anybody can beat them. You're just using them for practice. Pick somebody good. Pick somebody with a hard team. Now you're going to gain my respect. I want to see you beat a rival that has an equal team. You see, God is not showing off under easy conditions and saying, hey, well, look what I can do. He picks the worst possible day of the year to go across the Jordan River so that, let me tell you, if you can participate, if you can watch him perform a miracle on the most difficult situations and conditions possible, you'll have no trouble once you get across to the other side and say, can we trust God for this? Yeah, look what he just did. Think about the camaraderie, the fellowship between Abraham and Isaac. When God delivers Isaac, brings the sacrificial lamb to Abraham and says, no, don't kill your son. Here's the substitute lamb. And Isaac gets off the altar. He's a dead man. Yeah? Do you think those 2 men ever doubted God in the future? Did they ever have any problem? They said, no. We've come right to the moment of death and God delivered us. We can trust him with anything. In the worst conditions, God shows off. If we can watch God get us across the river during the time of a flood, you'll have no trouble trusting him with what I'll call a normal-sized problem. You see, the Hebrew children that were delivered out of the fiery furnace, that kind of a thing, you know, seems we want that to happen to seasoned and experienced, mature Christian leaders. That happened to teenage boys. But you know what? It formed and solidified their faith for a lifetime of trusting God. The earlier that kind of a test happened, can you imagine the mothers on the sideline going, no, 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 not my little baby, not my child in the fiery furnace. Yes, yes, yes. They will have a lifetime of walking with God in confidence when they come out of that furnace. And Mom, you can just hold your breath. You may recall the old gospel chorus. I'm not sure I can sing it for you. Got any rivers you think are impossible? Got any mountains you can't tunnel through? God specializes in things thought impossible. And He will do for you what no other power can do. That's the chorus of that song. Got any rivers you think are uncrossable? God can perform this. The personal application, of course, is that here's an ideal time for what I'll call the Red Sea method of parting the waters, bringing in the wind. Some of you have seen the movie where Charlton Heston is holding up the rod. Yeah, that's an indelible picture that can't be erased. And God sends the wind to dry the path for them to cross. You see, if you've been around church long enough and you've watched God move enough, you get it figured out. Well, I've seen God do this before. I know what He's going to do. He's going to part the river. He's going to dry the path, and we're going to walk across on dry ground. Just like they did 40 years ago. I've seen it before. And we figure out what God is going to do and how He's going to do it. But let me tell you, God's not committed or chained up to the way He used to do it. And I challenge you, don't bind yourself to methodology. Do not get married to methods and think that you're going to coerce or manipulate or anticipate what God is going to do, because His miracles are creative and inventive. Because He sends a command. Now you know there were some people right there that were expecting the Red Sea technique. I would have been one of them. Yeah, here, oh man, I've seen this before. This is going to happen this way, and oh man, get your camera out. This is going to be cool. And then the command comes from God, because He's got the Levitical priests are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and He says this: walk into the water. What? Walk into the water. But Lord, you know, I was counting on dry ground, and I wore my Sunday best sandals today, and they're going to get all soggy. I'm going to ruin my best gear. If I'd have known you were going to pull this, I'd have worn my old ratty ones. Right? But this can't be right. Let me look at the scripture. When did He do it like this before? Well, Ralph Neighbor published a book in 1973. You see, these people and these Levites have a perfect opportunity to panic, because it's not going like they thought. Nobody anticipated this. Walk into the water. Carry the ark out into the water. What? What? That can't be right. I just don't feel witness of that in my spirit. Well, step aside, brother, because there are people that are going to obey God no matter what He says. If He says, you know, do it on skateboards, do it on standing on your head, get some red socks on, they're going to do whatever He says to do. And if you have trouble with that, just please take a seat. Try not to get in the way of God's miracle. Ralph Neighbor had this book, 1973, and it's just a small book, but it's a powerful one. I think it's out of print now. The title of it was The Last 7 Words of the Church. The last 7 words of the church. You know what they are? We never did it that way before. And when that's our declaration, it's over. Because we have to trust God to do it differently. He's not married to methodology. He's not hooked up to do the same thing the same way to make you happy or comfortable. Your comfort zone is not of His concern. So, He wants me to be happy and comfortable. Baloney. He does not. He wants you to be challenged in faith to believe and trust Him. First thing we do, we hear the command, sanctify yourselves, wash your clothes, for I'm going to do something special tomorrow. First, prepare for God's special manifestation. Whatever that takes for you, whether you need to spend time alone, time in meditation, time in prayer, time in study of the Scripture, get yourself ready. Prepare for manifestation. Secondly, follow God's leading and timing. His leading and His timing. He says, walk down in the water. Walk down in the water. Don't you know they looked at each other in the eye and go, are we crazy? Are we just nuts? This is a raging torrent. We're all going to be swept downstream. We're going to lose the Ark of the Covenant, and I don't even know how to swim. That just doesn't sound right. Really? You mean everything that God says you need to agree with? As if you're giving the advice? The third thing is so very important. Don't panic when your feet get wet. It's an opportunity to panic because you're doing something that's never been done before. God's creating something new. He's trying to find people who will obey what He tells them to do, not what He did 40 years ago. He's not recreating the good old days like we do in our memory and in our warm, fuzzy thoughts. We like it the way it used to be, except that's not what God is connected to. In the first part of chapter 4, God's goodness needs to be remembered. Right today we're in what we call Thanksgiving week. It just falls in that particular way to thank God for what happened and to reflect and remember the good things that God has done. And He's done more than I can imagine. If I started writing things down, I would simply run out of paper, and I've got so much paper in my office you wouldn't believe it. What He has done for you and for me. Joshua directs 12 men to go. You see, they got over. I guess I skipped that part for you. God safely, at flood stage, stopped the water, and they walked across and got their feet wet. It was not dry. It was different. Now they're across, and Joshua sends 12 men back to the riverbed of the Jordan to retrieve a stone. And they're going to carry those stones 10 miles to the city called Gilgal. And they're going to build a monument out of those 12 stones. They're not going to put a sign next to it. They're not going to have a brass plaque that will teach all the tourists and all the youngsters that don't recall what this is about. They just are going to build a pile of 12 stones in Gilgal. Joshua then himself goes back to the riverbed, and he builds what he has in mind, a pile of designed stones, of 12 stones, in the riverbed. That pile of stones will never be seen again. Because once the water is released, it'll be buried under the water. No one will ever see it. But they've got one unseen and one that will be seen in Gilgal, a 12-stone memorial. These are to be reminders, one visible and one out of sight, of the goodness and the faithfulness of God. Israel needed constant assurance that God was a God of His Word and that He would do what He had promised. It's good to be reminded for what God has done in the past. It's a good thing for us to reflect upon past Thanksgiving days, on giving thanks for the blessings of God that have happened in our parents' life, in our family's life, and in our generations, if you have followed God that long. It's good to be reminded of the past for the goodness of God, and gives us assurance to trust Him now as well as in the future. There's an encouragement in your own journal. Many have built memorials in our world to honor deserving men and women for their accomplishments in the field of endeavor, for their leadership, for their bravery, sometimes for their valor in times of war. There's a lot of memorials in the world. You know, wouldn't it be good if we had a memorial to remind us of the wonderful grace of God? If we could have a memorial, some kind of a 12-stone pile of rocks that would spark conversation. You know what? I believe we have one. When we receive the elements of communion, the bread and the wine, we are commemorating the death of Jesus Christ and simultaneously looking forward to His second coming. We have a commemorative place. We commemorate, and we see and we remember the goodness of God. Think about it. And I've challenged several congregations through the years to find 12 stones, maybe as big as your hand or smaller, and glue them together, and then place that on your coffee table. Don't put a sign on it. And there's a purpose in that. The first person that visits you will say, "What is this? Are these rocks that you got on vacation over in Europe? Did you bring these from Australia with you?" No, let me tell you about these 12 stones. Let me tell you what this represents. There's a pile of 12 stones in Gilgal in Israel, and there's a pile of 12 stones at the bottom of the Jordan River, and this is one like that, only smaller. Let me tell you what God did. On flood day, He did something impossible to bring the children of Israel across Jordan River when it was impossible. You can't get across. They knew it. Let me tell you, the inhabitants of Jericho knew it. They said, Israel's stuck. They're stuck on the other side of the river, at least until the flood's over. Whoop, and here they are. How'd they get across that flooded river? What in the world is going on here? And chapter 2 says, our hearts did melt when we heard what God had done for you people. This is amazing, absolutely amazing. The memorial with a purpose. These two 12-stone memorials are, we're told the purpose 2 times in this chapter. In verse 23, God did a great miracle for the former generation when they crossed the Red Sea. And we know about that, but He also did a great miracle for the present generation to bring them across the Jordan River. Say, well, it was a smaller deal. It was just as big. Maybe the Jordan River was smaller in dimension than the Red Sea, but the miracle was just as big. There are no small miracles, are there? There's just not any. Here's my point. Don't ever think that God did something great for some other folks and He did something small for you. Let me tell you, He's done something big in your life. He's done something life-changing in your life. He has done something so important that whether it's as big as the Red Sea or as small as the Jordan River, don't exalt other people's experience in the miraculous with God to be so much better than yours. You've had a tremendous experience, for the work of God in your life is just as great as those majestic testimonies we hear from other people in another era. He's done great things in your life if you'll just reflect and see exactly what He's done. Joshua applies this event of building the two 12-stone memorials to a very practical part of life. He states the reason for them to be built with some particularly important principles in verse 6 of chapter 4 and verse 21. And he says, here's the reason. When your children ask. 2 times he says it. And they're going to ask, what are these stones? Because there's no sign. There's no brass plaque, as we said before. The answer is, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. Really? Well, how did that happen? Why did that happen? Grandpa, please tell us more details about that. Tell us about the 12 stones. What good will that do for you? It encourages your children to trust God like you do. That's the first thing. Second, it puts you in communication with your children or your close friends concerning the spiritual things of God. There are some things that are appropriate to call the pastor about, and there are some things that you need to take care of in your own family. You need to answer those questions. This will solidify your faith in God and your commitment to God. I believe that sincere questions need informative and honest answers. And you, as a believer in Jesus Christ, need to be equipped with answers to questions about your faith. Don't say, well, your mother's in charge of that, go ask her. Men, you need to know the answer when your children say, what are these stones? What does this mean? You know, there are those that think that communion service on Sunday morning at church is just a snack time. We had one little boy in a service in Alaska say, you know, could I have a little cheese with my cracker? He thought it was just snack. Now, I'm a lover of cheese, so I appreciated his request. But you know the problem? He didn't know what it meant. His parents had fallen down on the job to not prepare him and teach him what this meant and why we're doing this. What does this mean? There is a key yet subtle assumption here. You see, Joshua didn't just give that command to married people when your children ask. He didn't just give it to families that had children. He told it to couples that were just married and had no children. When your children ask. What? Well, we don't have any. You will. He spoke that to single people. When your children ask, we don't have any children, I'm not even married. You will be. There is a future for you. There will be a future. You see, when we commemorate the miracles of God and His intervention within our lives, and we know how to communicate it to the next generation, there will be a next generation. I spoke a word to a pretty good-sized church in Chile, South America. I said, there's people that are coming to your church. They were building on, they were adding on, they were remodeling. It's people coming to your church. And they thought they knew what I meant. I said, no, here's what I'm talking about. There are people that aren't here yet that are coming to your church. They're making plans. They're having children. There are people coming to your church that haven't been born yet, but in the future, they're coming to your church. When your children ask, we don't have any children, you will. The underlying statement I'm making is this: there is a future for you. There is a future for you. The 12 stones on your dining room table or on your coffee table will solidify there's a future. There will be people come to your home that want to ask, why are you so crazy of putting these rocks on your table? And you will have a wonderful door of opportunity to open to begin to tell them what God did for Israel and then what God has done for you. You may have an opportunity with people that the door may not be open any other way. If you have, I know one guy that had 12 stones, about the size of a hen's egg or less, small, and he welded them together and he put them on the dash of his pickup truck. Craziest thing he'd ever seen. Pile of rocks on the dash of his pickup. Why? Because his buddies would get in there and go, what's this? So let me tell you. Open the door for a testimony to say how good God is, how miraculous He is, what He has done in performance for us, a record of what God has done. One of the personal applications that could be made here is this. Review the past year of your life. Think about what God has done in your lifetime in that time span. Be specific and write it down. This isn't for anybody else to read, but for you to encourage yourself in the future. That you'll look back to right now as I speak, it's 2024 in November. What has He done for you this year? Write it down. Keep it to yourself. And next year, about this time, get out your record and go, look what God did for us last year. I need to write another record about what He's going to do in 2025 and what God's going to do. As a part of observation, I see these 12 stones both in Gilgal and at the bottom of the Jordan River. I see them as traffic barriers. You know those yellow things that have some triangular legs and they stop the traffic. They're may not be very strong, they may not hold up much weight, but they represent something that stop the traffic. Did you know that Israel never passed by these stones again as they went back to the desert in defeat? They never transcended the traffic barriers to go back to the desert life, to go back before the miraculous things when God intervened and changed their life. To do so would be to deny God's purpose for them in Canaan. It also give a testimony of defeat to the people of Canaan that God can't do what He said He would do. We're going to go back to the desert. We're going to go past the 12-stone memorial. We're going to ignore what God has done in our life, and then it shouts to all future generations, God just simply cannot come through to do for His people what He promised He would do. It's a good thing to recognize what God has done in your life and even what He's doing right now. And then put down a marker. Put down some kind of a stone memorial. Put down something. Coffee table. Pick up dashboard. Maybe it's in your bedroom somewhere. Build a marker. It doesn't have to be big. Something that reminds you that God did the miraculous in your life as He intervened, and then be ready to ask questions when people, some of them might be your children, begin to ask, what happened here? Say, well, I have a testimony of great things that God did when He intervened, when He saved my life, when He healed me, when He raised me out of the deathbed, when He delivered me from the storm. And I'm here today, alive, just to tell you how good God has been. Joshua gives us such motivation and such a model to proclaim and to testify the things of God. Are there challenges? The river's at flood stage, my friend. It's as bad as it can be. And God says, walk into the water. Don't worry about your shoes. Walk into the water. Don't worry about what's going to happen, because I'm about to do something miraculous in your life if you'll listen to me, if you'll obey me, if you'll trust me, and not get nervous when your feet get wet. God bless you tonight. I hope you'll join us for the next section. And I hope that God blesses you during this Thanksgiving season. Amen.
This program has been produced by A Life Devoted to Ministry, LTD Production, and is home of training trainers to lead. We hope you enjoyed this program. For more information or to support our ministry, please visit ldtms.org.